silence that followed in the crowded dining room was deafening. My mother stood over me, her hand still trembling in the air, the gravy boat overturned on the pristine white tablecloth. Beside her, my younger sister Chloe smirked, leaning back in her chair as if she'd just won a prize. "Stop being stubborn, Valerie," Chloe whispered loud enough for the whole table to hear. "He always wanted me anyway. You were just useful." Mom raised her hand to strike me again, her eyes flashing with a lifetime of favoritism, demanding I sign over the joint business deed and end my engagement right there. Neither of them realized the front door had clicked open. None of them saw my fiancé, Julian, standing in the dark hallway, holding the legal evidence that was about to dismantle their entire lives. Before she could slap me again, he stepped in. "My name is Valerie, and at 31 years old, I finally learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and some people only look at you as a stepping stone. Growing up, I was always the invisible daughter in our household, while my younger sister, Chloe, was treated like a fragile piece of porcelain. I spent my entire late 20s pouring sweat, tears, and every single dollar I had into building a boutique marketing firm from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks just to survive. Meanwhile, 28-year-old Chloe lived a life of absolute privilege, floating from one failed hobby to another while living off generous family handouts and my mother Eleanor's endless praise. My achievements were routinely swept under the rug, treated as mere baseline duties, while Chloe's bare minimum efforts were celebrated like historic victories. The real shift in our family dynamic happened when I met Julian. Julian is a brilliant, highly successful corporate attorney who sees me, respects my hustle, and loves me for exactly who I am. When he proposed to me 6 months ago with a beautiful diamond ring, it felt like the first time in my life I was truly chosen. But instead of being happy for me, the atmosphere in my family turned entirely toxic. I could see the cold jealousy festering in Chloe's eyes every time Julian walked into a room, and my mother constantly dropped subtle, bitter hints about how a man of his stature was wasted on someone as plain and business-minded as me. The morning of Thanksgiving Day arrived with an uncharacteristic chill in the air, but the true coldness was waiting for me inside my childhood home. I had arrived 2 hours early, hoping to help with the preparations and ease into the holiday, but the moment I stepped into the kitchen, the atmosphere felt incredibly heavy. My mother, Eleanor, didn't even look up from basting the turkey, greeting me with a sharp critique about my outfit instead of a warm welcome. As I tied on an apron, she began laying down subtle trap lines, shifting the conversation toward Chloe's latest sudden interest in business and digital branding. She kept sighing loudly, talking about how Chloe just needed a proper platform to truly showcase her hidden brilliance, while completely downplaying the fact that I actually ran a successful corporation in that exact industry. I tried to ignore the passive-aggressive jabs, keeping my focus on chopping vegetables, but the tension in the room only continued to escalate as the rest of the family arrived. Just as we were about to set the grand dining table, my phone buzzed with a text message from Julian. A sudden, massive legal emergency had broken out at his firm, forcing him to stay behind to finalize some critical documents. He promised he would drive over the absolute second he was finished, but as I walked into the dining room completely alone, I felt a deep knot form in my stomach, realizing I was isolated without any support. As soon as the carved turkey hit the center of the table, the atmosphere shifted from tense to predatory. My mother cleared her throat, tapping her crystal wine glass to command everyone's absolute attention before leaning forward with a sharp, calculated smile. She casually announced that Chloe had decided to pivot into the marketing world, and to ensure her success, they had decided it was best for Chloe to take over my boutique firm completely. I sat there in absolute disbelief, my fork hovering in midair as Chloe gave a smug, entitled nod from across the table. My mother didn't even ask. She simply demanded that I sign over the majority ownership stakes of my company to my sister as a necessary, supportive family gift. When I firmly refused, stating that I had built that business with my own blood and sweat, the trap snapped shut completely. Chloe leaned forward, her false sweetness instantly evaporating into pure malice as she loudly claimed that my business wasn't the only thing she deserved. She confidently told the entire table that Julian had been secretly texting her private, flirtatious messages for the past 2 months, claiming he was trapped with the wrong sister. She looked me dead in the eyes and demanded that I break off our engagement immediately so that Julian could finally be with a woman who truly matched his social stature. My mother nodded in agreement, stating that family assets and high-quality men belonged with the bloodline's golden child, completely dismissing my 22 months of devotion. They expected me to break down, cry, and hand over my entire life out of sheer embarrassment in front of the extended family, sitting there like wolves waiting to tear apart my hard-earned dignity. I stood my ground, staring directly at my mother and sister as a cold wave of clarity washed over me. I let out a sharp, breathless laugh, completely unfazed by their pathetic attempts at intimidation, and called out the absolute absurdity of their delusion right in front of the entire extended family. I told Chloe that Julian wouldn't look at her twice if she were the last woman on earth, and told my mother that she would never by my sudden, fierce defiance. Eleanor's face flushed a deep, violent crimson as she slammed her chair back and stood up, completely losing her composure. Before I could even blink, she swung her hand and delivered a hard, stinging slap right across my left cheek, the sheer force of it overturning the gravy boat onto the white tablecloth. Chloe smirked instantly, leaning back in her seat with total satisfaction as she whispered that I should stop being stubborn because Julian always wanted her anyway, and I was just useful. My mother raised her hand a second time, her eyes flashing with a lifetime of unchecked favoritism, ready to strike me again for refusing to obey. Neither of them had realized the heavy wooden front door had clicked open moments before, and absolutely none of them saw Julian standing in the dark hallway, holding the legal evidence that was about to utterly dismantle their entire lives. Julian stepped directly between my mother and me, his massive frame completely shielding me from her raised hand as his face darkened with a cold, terrifying fury. Chloe's smug smile instantly faltered, but she quickly tried to shift gears, putting on a pathetic, tearful act and pretending that Julian had finally arrived to rescue her from my selfishness. She reached out toward him, but Julian didn't even look her way. Instead, he brought up the digital records directly on his phone, placing it right onto the center of the ruined Thanksgiving table for everyone to see. He looked my mother dead in the eyes and revealed the real reason he was late. He hadn't been dealing with a random legal emergency at his firm, but had spent the morning finalizing an intense, private investigation into our family's hidden financial records. The room went entirely breathless as Julian exposed the devastating truth they thought was buried forever. My mother had secretly collateralized our childhood home to fund Chloe's astronomical credit card debts and failed luxury lifestyle, and they were currently facing immediate foreclosure. They didn't want my marketing firm out of love or sisterly pride. They desperately needed my successful corporate assets to use as a financial shield to avoid going completely bankrupt. To finish them off, Julian pulled up a certified digital forensics report, proving that the flirtatious private texts Chloe claimed to have received from him were completely fraudulent, spoofed messages she had sent to her own phone from an online app to force us apart. The table dynamic completely flipped as a suffocating panic set into the room, replacing their arrogant smirks with pure, unadulterated terror. Julian, using his full legal authority and unwavering corporate stature, laid out the ice-cold reality staring them directly in the face. They were walking a razor-thin line toward immediate financial ruin and severe criminal fraud charges if they didn't back down this very second. My mother's hands began to shake uncontrollably as she stared at the official digital evidence, her face draining of all color, while Chloe burst into frantic, desperate tears, realizing her elaborate web of lies had been entirely torn to shreds. I stood tall, looking my pale, trembling mother and weeping sister straight in the eyes with a level of detachment I had never felt before. In that exact moment, I officially cut all ties with them, realizing I owed absolutely nothing to people who would gladly destroy my life for their own database of greed. Julian gently took my hand, completely shielding me as we turned our backs on the pathetic chaos, walking out of the childhood home without looking back once. We left the elaborate Thanksgiving dinner completely ruined, the extended family sitting in stunned silence, and my mother and sister left completely alone to choke on the severe consequences of their own toxic greed. 3 months later, I am sitting on the porch of a beautiful new home, completely free from the suffocating shadows of my past. My boutique marketing firm is thriving more than ever, and my wedding to Julian is fully back on track, planned exactly the way we want it. Meanwhile, the reality of their choices caught up to them fast. My mother was forced to downsize heavily and sell the family home just to cover Chloe's astronomical debts. Looking back, that painful slap at the Thanksgiving table was honestly the best thing that ever happened to me because it finally broke the spell of me desperately seeking my mother's approval. It forced me to realize that family is defined by love and respect, not by genetics or about all of you who have listened to my story today. How would you have handled a toxic family betrayal of this magnitude? And would you have walked away like I did? So I can see how far my story has reached. Thank you